Hello.
Hi.
Jayne, could I ask you a question quickly? Are you in South Africa now?
I am.
What did you need? What sort of test did you need when you arrived? Was it a normal one? Did you need a PCR one?
I needed a PCR 72 hours before, but I think the regulations have changed, so you might want to check. But yeah, it was fairly straightforward, to be honest. And there's a form you need to fill in, print and fill in before you come, but that's on your airline website. It's quite straightforward.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome back, and welcome to people who are new to the seminar. I'm introducing the two speakers today. Sid Mohandas is a former Montessori educator and teacher trainer, and the founder of the Male Montessorian, TMM, and the Monty-Story platforms. They are currently doing their doctorate at Middlesex University, investigating how a gendered workforce is materialized in Montessori spaces, in which they put feminist new materialisms in conversation with post-colonial, decolonial theories and lesser-known subaltern studies, such as Dalit and Adivasi feminisms. Sid's recent publications include Beyond Male Recruitment, Decolonizing Gender Diversification Efforts in the Early Years by Attending to Past, Present, Material, Discursive, Affective Entanglements, a paper they co-authored with Professor Jayne Osgood, titled Reconfiguring the Male Montessorian, the Mattering of Gender Through Pink Towering Practices, and a chapter co-authored with Jayne in the Sage Handbook of Global Childhoods titled Figuring Gender in Early Childhood with Animal Figurines. And then to introduce Jayne. Jayne Osgood is Professor of Childhood Studies at the Center for Education Research and Scholarship, Middlesex University. Her work addresses issues of social justice through critical engagements with policy, curricular frameworks, and pedagogical approaches in early childhood education and care. She's committed to extending understandings of the workforce, families, gender, and sexualities, the child and childhood in early years contexts. She has published extensively within the postmodernist paradigm with over 100 publications in the form of books, chapters, and journal papers. Her most recent books include Feminists Researching Gendered Childhoods, Bloomsbury, 2019, and Post-Developmental Approaches to Childhood Art, Bloomsbury, 2019. Jayne?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you so much to Karen, who's not here but is here, for inviting me over to South Africa. It's such a privilege and such an experience, and it's such a joy to be in the company of real people in a real space, even though we are still in boxes. It does feel quite refreshing, to say the least. So what I'd wanted to do with you here today was to offer some insights, really. I'm a journal editor on a number of journals, Gender and Education Journal, Reconceptualizing Educational Research Methodology Journal, and I'm also guest editor, or have been guest editor, for a number of other journals. And journals can be very intimidating spaces, as for us as authors, for us as reviewers, and indeed, as I have found, for us as editors. But it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. And so what I want to offer you today are just some insights into the way in which I've been working with my co-editors to try to push back against some of the conventions, some of the limitations, the regulations, the machinery that is academic publishing, and attempting to, through small acts of subversion and resistance, to try to pursue other ways that we can run a journal, and we can support authors, and we can have the reviewing process done within the machinery that does nevertheless hold us into place sometimes. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you. Now, Sid is unfortunately not here in Cape Town. He's embedded in the PowerPoint, but I know he's here in spirit. So let me just get this up and let me know if you can see it. Is that okay? Right, there's a QR thing. What is it? Symbol. QR. If you wave your phone over it, it will take you to the Padlet for this session. The idea is that there is an activity that we'll do towards the very end, but I think if you wanted to put other things into the Padlet as we go through, that's absolutely fine too. We're just using it in the same way that it's been used in the other sessions. But if you have your mobile phone to hand, it would be great, because towards the end of the session, what we'll do is a sort of sound experiment with some, and you'll need pen or pencil and some paper, and to take some photos of what emerges on your paper with your pen or pencil. But that's for later, but that will be the use of the Padlet there. So what are we doing? We're the title of this session is Undoing the Academic Publishing Machine Through Entangled Feminist Activism. And I've kind of given you a sense of what I and my co-editors, how we see that happening. And of course the slash is important because we can't completely remove the academic publishing machine, because we are entangled, embedded, caught up in whether we like it or not. So how can we then go about undoing some of that machinery that can be quite brutal and quite unkind a lot of the time? And how can we do that through gentle forms of feminist activism? And that's what I want to share with you today. Are you recording, Annika? Yeah, excellent. Okay, so I'll get started. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is that I come here representing a team of us. Myself, Carol Taylor, who I know is known to many of you as she's sort of essential to the Post-Qualitative Research Collective. Suzanne Gannon, who's based at Western Sydney University in Australia, and Kate Scantlebury, who's in the US. And as Teresa has said, we have a contribution from Sid Mohandas, who is one of my PhD students. So there's more than just me here. There's a kind of collection of us who are trying to push against the academic publishing machine. Okay, so how we're envisaging the undoing, and how we're conceptualizing the academic publishing machine is, as I've said, a kind of ongoing process, an ongoing commitment to entangled feminist work. Gender and Education Journal is a feminist journal, and it's obviously about gender and it's about education, but it also is about feminist theory and feminist doing. It's about making some sort of tangible difference in the world. And so we feel as a team of editors that it's absolutely crucial that we live by our politics through the way that we run the journal to the best of our capacities and abilities. But we recognise that the academic publishing machine is enormous, and it's underpinned by capitalist agendas, machinations. It's also very Anglo-centric, which feels very important, particularly speaking from where I am located today. The global north is privileged, English as a language is privileged, and those things are problematic, and we do what we can within the confines of the machine to try to remedy or challenge or disrupt that in some ways. And it's a very performative space. You know, we've been talking over the past few days about the power of numbers and quantification and metrics and measurement. And we feel that very, very powerfully as editors, and we know that you feel it as authors and reviewers. So it's these sorts of things that are really crucial to grapple with, to push against, to challenge, to disrupt, in often, as it says in that third paragraph, micro or sometimes seemingly invisible ways, but they're important ways, and I'll go on to illustrate how that takes shape through the research process. So what we want to do towards the end of this session is to play with the idea of the academic publishing machine and the way it works on us and through us, bodily, affectively, emotionally, physically, mentally, and have a play with sound, memory, hauntings and ghosts to think deeply about what else machinic entanglements make possible. Okay, so do feel free just to chip in as we're going along, ask questions, or pop stuff in the chat. That's absolutely fine. Okay, so the academic publishing machine, this is kind of something that we're working with as a concept, but it began life by a colleague, Eileen Honan, who's in Australia, and she wrote about the academic writing machine, and Carol and colleagues have also written about the academic conferencing machine. And it's, bringing these words together kind of underscores how enmeshed, interwoven, entangled and machinic a lot of academic life and academic doing is. So trying to get at, well, what is this machine? How does it work? How does it operate? How does it work on us? And then once we've kind of got a handle on that, which I think most of us probably do, certainly in a negative sense often, because it's not, joy is an act of resistance. This is what we want to encourage, is this idea that writing, publishing, sharing your work should be a joyful experience, but it can also be an act of resistance, because often writing and publishing and having your work publicly scrutinised is not a pleasant experience, and going into the academic publishing machine and not knowing what's going on with your work, where it's going, who's seeing it, what processes it is put through, is really quite disconcerting, and it doesn't have to be like that necessarily. So then we're thinking, as editors, as authors, as reviewers, how can we undo some of that academic publishing machine and the sometimes trauma, but the pain and the discomfort and the anxiety that kind of entering into that machinic world can bring about for us. So then we're thinking about feminist activism and how we can do that through the everyday, through what we do as authors, reviewers, editors. And as I say, it's really thinking about how these processes work on our bodies and through our bodies, and set in motion affective forces that sometimes feel greater than us. How can we together generate ways to think, feel, do otherwise? And how can we engage in more affirmative, joyful modes of writing and publishing? And over the last few days, we've talked about the joys of collaborative writing, the joys of different ways of organising ourselves and our work, and where writing gets done, how it gets done, and through what processes. So thinking really quite seriously about disrupting the normal imagined way in which we should be writing and publishing our work. And then thinking, within the confines of the academic publishing machine, how can we reimagine what a journal might be, what it can be and what it can do, and what the offshoots of that might be. So those are the sorts of considerations that we want to bring to today's session. Now, this is very familiar, I'm sure, or it certainly is to me. But it goes back to that point about, you know, the metrics that hold us in place and that we're accountable to. And for Routledge, the owner of Gender and Education, the massive capitalist, very, very wealthy publishing house, these figures matter more to them, I would suggest, than they do to us, but they are important to us too. You know, so the impact factor, the which quartile we're in, the number of downloads per year, and all of these sorts of things are really important indicators of how good a journal is. But of course, they tell a very partial and very brutal and selective story about a given journal. So these 4 questions, I think, are really important to have in mind when you're thinking about the journals that you go to, the journals that you're interested in having your work published in. Who owns the journal? There's an increasing number of open access journals. Some are hosted at in university context, some are completely independent, but the vast majority are owned by these large publishing companies. And there are multiple agendas circulating, and for a publishing house, it's principally about profit, reputation, profit, and so on. And how far does that agenda sit with your university's agenda? You know, so there'll be pressure upon you to publish in particular journals and not others. What recourse do you have to push back against that and say, no, a better home for my journal paper for my work is somewhere less known, less prestigious, not in a Q1 top quartile journal? How do we navigate this landscape that's so fraught with metrics and shaped by metrics? And I think that's what this session is endeavouring to explore, is to think about what's your agenda. You are fixed and you are positioned by these other competing agendas, but who are you as a writer? You know, who do you want to engage with your work? How do you want them to engage with your work? And it's a case of balancing lots of agendas, personal agendas. You'll have your CV, your career trajectory to have in mind, but you'll also have the collaborations and networks that you want to be part of. So there are all sorts of things for you to consider, and then to balance this out with the other agendas and demands that are on you as a publishing academic. Does anyone have any? I see something in chat. Does anybody have any questions or comments at this point? Okay, I'll keep going. Okay, so the thing that one of the things I wanted to share with you was how we as an editorial team have thought about these issues, about how we're caught up and fixed, regulated, contained, pressured by these metrics and by reputation and impact factor and so on and so forth. How do we, what does that do to us, and how do we navigate that on a daily basis? And we were invited to write this chapter as part of a handbook on academic freedom. And we wrote the piece from the perspective of feminist academics, and what does it mean for us in these toxic times where higher education is increasingly performative and accountable and numerical and all of those things. And we crafted this chapter. Again, you know, what's quite interesting, this is a chapter, so it's not worth as much as a journal paper publication would have been, but we elected to write this piece because it was important to us. We wanted to enter into that debate in that book, in that volume, alongside others writing about academic freedom, and to ensure that there was a chapter, an entry in that handbook that dealt with or addressed or offered a feminist account of what academic freedom can mean and do for feminist academics. So again, this is, you know, going back to that point about what's your agenda, what are your priorities, and And how do you navigate that? So the chapter sort of came about by us collectively, collaboratively telling stories to each other about our experiences of being feminist academics, and how we encounter the sense of, or the reality of, academic freedom. And so we put together a series of vignettes, and they feature within the chapter. And I'm sharing my vignette here, but I think I certainly suspect it resonates with many others. It certainly resonated with my co-authors, about the costs and the implications of academic freedom. And now I need to move you again because I can't read. Sorry. Okay, so this is what I say in the chapter. As I type this, I have numbness in 3 fingers and a shooting pain up my entire left arm, diagnosed as cubital tunnel syndrome, slowing down my productivity, literally keeping me awake at night. The painkillers induce drowsiness and confusion by day. Last time it was a repetitive strain injury, the time before a slipped disc, and then the dreaded recurring labyrinthitis. My body's warning sign, slow down. The symptoms, exhaustion, acute fatigue, butterfly-like fluttering in the inner ear, dizziness, disorientation, and nausea, all of which it seems are recognisable to other feminist academics. The fruits of our labour, maybe? The doctor forbids me to drive, but somehow it remains possible to honour the commitment to deliver a keynote and examine a PhD via video link at dawn. Being in the business of a feminist ethics of care is costly, born of a deep commitment and devotion to students, colleagues, co-editors, authors, reviewers, and the production of knowledge that can make a difference in the world. It seems that even when our bodies are broken, we are compelled to persist with our feminist endeavours. An inability to say no will be your downfall. You realise it's a case of when, not if, you burn out. Exercising a feminist ethic of care is all-consuming and comes at a hefty price. Going the extra mile, considering deeply and carefully each decision made. The price then becomes etched upon our bodies. Self-care, we are endlessly reminded, is the vital antidote. It is impossible to care for others unless you care for yourself, goes the mantra. Yoga, mindfulness, vitamin supplements, healthy diet, regular exercise, pedicures, massage, a duvet day, time out and indulgence, but not so much that it becomes an unhealthy addiction. But still, the embodied manifestation of the enterprising neoliberal subject, constantly at war with the ethical feminist, bubbles to the surface. Sense, endured and ultimately medicated. This is not the slow scholarship that Isabel Stengers was advocating. Our bodies force slowness, yet this slowness does not create space to think with greater intensity. Instead, we are offered a brief window of time to heal. Yet this is not a mind-body dualism at work. Rather, neoliberalism is embodied and performed in spite of our feminist selves. The additional invisible labour that is undertaken has become our lifeblood, yet we are infected, affected and sick with toxicity. Bing! An email alert. A new submission has landed in your editor centre and requires immediate attention. So, yeah, I think this is something that is recognisable to many, and it's certainly what we're wrestling with as editors of Gender and Education Journal. And it's complex and it's difficult, but it's something that we feel really passionate that we have to keep pursuing, this impossible balancing act of exercising and activating a feminist ethics of care alongside what that means for us bodily. I wonder if anybody has similar bodily experiences that they maybe want to share as authors or reviewers or indeed editor or co-editor. co-writer, co-author.
Jane,
Yeah.
can I just your last line about the ping really resonated so well, and I think I've been saying to people since living under, in lockdown and teaching online, and the sort of extended time of that, and how it leaks into all the spaces that I previously might have had for my own thinking or my own writing, is kind of the online life is just becoming one sort of something I can't ever escape. And I begin to feel like an app of my computer. Yeah. The email is incredibly all pervasive, but I think online teaching has kind of added another layer for me.
Yeah. We have this this system at the journal. I think it's quite common practice, where you have a traffic light system for each of the papers that you're managing, and you can be managing up to sort of 50 papers at any one time. And often you open your email and it's just awash with red traffic lights. Everything is a problem, and you need to deal with it immediately because you haven't dealt with it in the time that the machine says you should have done. And that can feel quite overwhelming and really disheartening, that all your hard work really feels quite futile. But yeah, it's real. Viv, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have any experiences about the sort of bodily reaction, but I'm very conscious of this being a whole lot of unpaid work, and that academics do, and particularly women academics, because what I've noticed is that I've heard a whole lot of men saying, I've decided now that I'm not reviewing. And I just have made that decision. And it's sort of like committee work too, where people, it lands up being certain people who sort of keep feeling obliged to do this unpaid and unrecognized work. Because I think, being a chief editor of a journal, I'm not paid a thing. And it's a huge amount of work, and it can just sort of be, become unwieldy, and no one is going to come to you and say, look, I'm terribly sorry you have this huge workload. So I'm just wondering, whether anyone besides academics would be signing up for these sorts of things, and whether we crazy to be doing all this work. I mean, at what level are we going to say, actually, no, I can't do this anymore?
Yeah, it's something that we wrestle with, and I think the we is really important here, because there are four of us. And we have one of the things that we've implemented is a rotating chief editor. So we operate a kind of rolling program of one of us editor-in-chief, the other deputy, the other two are there for support and still processing papers, and we have monthly editorial meetings. But it means that nobody ever feels the ultimate burden of responsibility, and that we share it between us. And when there are times of ill health, or one of us is absent for whatever reason, we can support each other. But that doesn't, address the contradiction that you raised about, the free labour, and often it is female free labour, and that is a feminist issue. It's deeply problematic. And I think, the point that Teresa was raising is the intensification of that under COVID and the pandemic conditions. We've seen it, and it puts us in a really difficult position as editors. And, how do we then extend an even greater ethic of care for feminist academics who are struggling and taking a disproportionate load? There aren't easy answers, but it's a really contentious and difficult space to occupy. And we're definitely seeing, the willingness or the availability of reviewers it's really compromised, and more so during pandemic times. So it's a reality, and it's and we do what we can, but it's imperfect. We know that. Yeah. Okay. Oh, Joanna.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. It's a very topic very close to my heart this morning. Thank you. And that in your extract from the chapter, you talk about burnout not just a question of when. And I just see so many of my colleagues just literally falling over, keeling over, and just and how their bodies are paying, the sort of conditions that you described, the conditions directly related to the sort of posture and the sitting at the computer. And I think it's important to really document that in that particular way. But I think what I was thinking about is how, when we set out to engage in these practices in a more loving way, that costs a great deal of additional time and energy, and also blurs boundaries that Teresa was talking about, that being available to, I don't know, because I suppose we might make friendships, for example, through a group like this, and there's a kind of blurring, and a thing about being available or not available, and using other modes of communication which are more informal, and then beginning to share other things too, and actually the sustainability, I think really asking serious questions about the sustainability of practicing in a loving feminist way, if you like, these academic activities, and the implications of that, and having conversations with each other about those aspects too.
Yeah, I think that all of that is absolutely spot on, and I think it goes back to the discussion that was had yesterday about what is collaboration, what's a collective, what's kind of a collectivity working together as a community. And I think that's how we view gender and education. We're the custodians for as long as our editorship lasts, and while we're here, we want to work with our authors and with our reviewers as part of a community that are all invested in this kind of pushing back and disrupting, and navigating a way around systems that are there to stay. It's complex, it's really challenging and difficult, and there aren't easy answers, but and that's why we kind of draw attention to the micro, and these very small micro activisms, if you like, of enacting our feminist politics in every aspect of the way that we're endeavouring to run the journal, and pushing back and subverting and resisting and whatever it takes in those small ways every day. So just going back to the traffic light system, we advised Routledge we didn't want that anymore. It wasn't helpful. And we were perfectly capable of regulating our own workload and knowing that we were overwhelmed. We didn't need traffic lights every day. You know, so it's those sorts of things, and, you know, that seem benign but are really quite pernicious and unnecessary. But if you don't push back against them, then they become the norm. Thank you for those comments. I don't know if have I missed anyone? Nobody's got their hands up. Okay, so just back to this session. Really, this is what we see as the purpose, is to kind of have a chance to consider what's involved in writing for publication, particularly for emerging scholars. You become long in the tooth at this stuff the more you do it, and you become more hardened to it, but nevertheless, you know, we know as doctoral students ourselves, as early career researchers ourselves, as we worked our way through our academic careers, it can feel like a very brutal and precarious and exposing, a vulnerable place to be, trying to get your work published, and to know what's happening to your work, and once you send it on its way, and to be prepared before you send it on its way. So it's and we see this kind of this praxis of demystifying what happens is a feminist act. You know, people, writers, authors need to have some sense about what's going on, what will happen, and how can they best prepare themselves, and that we see as a feminist ethics of care. And then also thinking about the value of peer review, and I take on board completely what people are saying about it being free labour, but it also has a raft of benefits to you as a writer to become a reviewer. It's also about being part of a community, as I said, so that it's yes, it's free labour, but it also has certain value to you as an emerging scholar. So we'll look into that a bit. And then an opportunity for you to share what you do. You know, we as editors are always learning. We don't feel that we've got the perfect formula. We're doing what we do the way we do it because that's what we feel passionate about and committed to. But we're definitely open to learning with and from others. So, you know, today should be an opportunity to exchange your experiences, narratives, build connections. You know, I think that's what's great about this post-qualitative research collective, is we're coming from different places, but, you know, we have a shared purpose and a shared set of politics, I think. So yeah, it's an opportunity to kind of build on those too. Okay, so when I think we've kind of touched on this, and that conversation, those conversations with the three of you, Teresa, Joanna and Viv, has really helped kind of address some of this without me having to work my way through each question. But feminist ethics is kind of foundational to what we're doing, and it may be that in other journals where feminist, the F word, is not overtly spoken, there's still a feminist of ethics of care operating and shaping what scholars are doing. And for us though, because it is the journal that it is, and we are the scholars that we are, then it is, we feel it's kind of foundational to what we're doing and what we're seeking to pursue through the journal. And as I've said, we see it as a community. It's the editors as custodians and this larger community of reviewers and authors, and finding ways to support each other and to build each other up. There's too much knocking each other down in the wider world of academia. So, you know, the importance of care and an ethic of care. And demystifying the process is a careful praxis of you know, feminist scholarship. So yeah, that's in essence what we're about. So every journal will have, either on the inside cover of a published edition of a journal, or on the website, they will have a very clear set of aims and scope. And as an author, we would strongly urge you to engage with that list of aims and scope. it will make the difference between a desk reject and your paper going on to the next stage. If you've written a paper without a journal necessarily in mind and it doesn't fit, then that's your first hurdle. The editors will look at it and say, they haven't really addressed gender, or it's not really about education. Well, the title of the journal is already a clue, but then when you look more deeply into the aims and scope, any journal has a very clear idea about what it's about and the sorts of debates that it's seeking to support and to generate. So, we openly state that it's about gender and other differences, and theory and theorization and theoretical framework appears pretty much in every one of those aims and scopes. So we're expecting theorized pieces, but we also want it to make a difference, a practical difference to education. We also want it to be in conversation with the existing debates in our journal. So it's not the cynic in us could say, well, it's about the impact factor. The more citations you have of papers that are in your journal, then that works to improve the impact factor, and it does to an extent, but that's not what's important to us. What's important to us is that authors are coming to Gender in Education as their journal of choice because they're interested in contributing to the existing debates, extending them, challenging them, upending them, engaging with them in a meaningful way. So going back through all the issues and searching for the topic that you're writing on will ensure that you are locating your work within this community and extending those debates. And you would be amazed at the number of papers that we receive that fall at that very first hurdle of not thinking about, well, why am I submitting it to this journal as opposed to another journal? So writing with a journal in mind is really kind of fundamental first step, if you like. Another thing that it's worth doing is to look at who are the editors of a given journal, who is on the editorial board. And it may be that you go to a particular journal or you gravitate towards wanting to publish your work there because that's where a lot of the people that you read publish their work. So you're already having these kind of connections through the ways that you think and the ideas that you have and maybe the theoretical frameworks that you mobilize in your work. So those are kind of, they seem quite obvious when you get further into your career, but when you're starting out, then maybe not. And actually that's not necessarily fair. We do get some very established scholars who send work to us and they haven't engaged with debates that are in the journal. So it's really, really important, I think, to have that in mind before you do anything. Why this journal, and how is my work contributing? So then I think this is quite again, on the surface seems quite obvious, and then when you start to scratch away at the surface, there's a whole raft of reasons we write, and writing is difficult. I don't think I've ever met an academic writer who thinks that it's easy. It's really painful, it's difficult, and we do it partly because sometimes we have to, and there are various reasons we have to. The obvious ones being career progression, the others, external validation mechanisms such as the research excellence framework, that's what we call it in the UK, the audit of the quality of research outputs periodically, and that's a real driver to get your papers into the quartile 1 journals, and it's a serious consideration, but I would encourage any early career researcher not to have that as their only objective, is to have referable outputs, but think more broadly about the different sorts of papers that you write, and they may not even be papers, the different research outputs that you write and where's a good home for them, and it doesn't always have to be the quartile 1 journal. Other reasons may be, you've written your PhD and now you need to get the world needs to know about your brilliance, so you need to start working out how you can extract what is a very different piece of writing. Your PhD is the long game. It's a slow unfurling of an argument. It's interwoven and it's a marathon. The journal paper is much more dense, concise, short. It's a sprint, but they both need to be of the same quality. It's a very, very different proposition. So this idea that you can salami slice from your thesis is much harder than it sounds. But you do need to get your work out there. The world needs to hear what you've been slaving over for many years. And then it may be because you're invited to. So there may be a special issue, or you're part of a group or a network and you've been invited to submit papers as part of maybe a special issue. So because you're known for work in that area. Or it might be that you're writing to develop your thinking. You have a thought, an idea about maybe a theoretical conundrum or a question that you want to explore further, and the process of writing enables you to pursue that. So you don't, it's not so strategic, and maybe that's where some of the joy emerges again, when you're writing something for curiosity's sake rather than career trajectory or ref output purposes. And yeah, you know, as I say, I think it's impossibly difficult sometimes to write, but I think we also probably really do enjoy it. You know I do. There are moments of the writing process that I absolutely hate, and it's usually I've got some great ideas, and then I put those great ideas down, and then it's like, now what? There's only another 5,500 words to write, and developing those ideas. But the developing the ideas is often the deep thinking, the engaging with other people's ideas, and you're never writing something in isolation. You're always part of a collective, from the literature that you engage with, the conversations that you have, and I think some recommendations were made yesterday about, have other people read your work, get used to critical feedback, and stay in love with it, really, and that's where I would recommend, having something of for want of a better word, a sort of portfolio approach to your writing and publishing. Yes, go for the Q1 journals, but go to the more obscure ones, the lesser known. Write book chapters, write as a large collective. Give everything a try. I think. Yeah, the Q1 journals are important, but they're not the be-all and end-all of academic scholarship, in my view. And then, this kind of connects to your papers from your PhD, to disseminate your findings. Get your work out there. People can then engage with it. They can hate it, they can dislike it. That's fine. That's academic debate, but get it out there. So there are. I don't know if anybody can think of any other reasons academics might write. You don't necessarily have to share them. I'm sure there are other reasons, but it's not purely strategic, and it's not purely mechanistic. There's a whole raft of reasons that we write. And don't get too bound up with the demands of the academic machine. Right? Remember love and fun in the process, and collaboration. Okay, so then you've got you've written something, or you're writing something, but all your writing will always be subjected to some sort of judgment, and the question is, what makes a good article? Well, that's very subjective, but what makes a good article for that particular journal is a slightly different question. Okay, so these are, I think I changed this actually. This was going to be the breakout thing, but then I changed it because I was making, anyway, so I don't know how many people are here. Have we got enough? Annika, are you there? Have we got enough?
Yeah, we have 15 people.
Perfect. Okay. So what I'd like to do is to invite you to go into a breakout room and have an opportunity to chat with, it may be that you know who's in that room, and that's absolutely fine, but introduce yourself to the other participants and then share a personal experience of publishing your work or considering publishing your work, the kind of the grappling, the difficulties, the challenges, the joys, the love, the pleasure. But your personal experiences, one or however many that spring to mind about, you know, the academic publishing machine from your experience, and how have these experiences affected you, and what did you take away from those experiences? So we'll have about 7 minutes for that, and then we'll come back and have an opportunity to share and discuss. Does that sound okay? Okay.
That was quite short, I thought.
Yeah, we were just warming up, hey? We were
Feedback,
just,
make
yeah.
it longer. I've got lots I want to cover though, but it sounds like you had fun and found joy, so
Yeah.
that's good. That was the objective. Poor old Mary got stuck with me. I don't think she had maybe so much fun as it sounded the rest of you, but she did tell me that her PhD successfully passed. So now she's
Good, great.
Great.
I don't know if anybody wants.
Not only pass, but absolutely no corrections or even typos.
Oh my goodness, Mary, you need to do the next session.
Yeah.
Dive embarrassment now.
Okay, does anybody want to feedback, or I'm happy for that not to happen, but I'm equally happy for you to kind of feedback if you want to share what was said in your groups, or we can carry on and you can feedback as I trundle along. It's entirely up to you. Okay, I'll take that as a... Oh, go on.
Hi. So I was with Viv and Carol in a group, and we were just talking about collaborative writing and sort of the pros and cons of that, and how writing is so personal and how you sort of develop a relationship with people through your writing. Viv was saying that. Viv, just feel free and jump in if I'm saying anything that you didn't. But sometimes, you know, with when you write and you write with people that you might not necessarily share the same opinions or views about writing, or if there are any sort of conflicts or clashes that come up, it weaves its way into the writing. And sometimes, well, I found on one or two occasions in the past, it's kind of taken me away from the essence of what I'm trying to say. And I found myself sort of stepping back and standing on the side, you know, and sort of letting other people's writing take over. Navigating
Yeah,
those,
I think it's kind of
tricky.
negotiated on a kind of project by project basis. I know, and then other times just a very small part. I think the conversations that were had yesterday about how collaborative writing can be really surprising and generative because it goes in directions you hadn't necessarily go. And yeah. But we at Gender and Education, we welcome collaborative pieces. I think most journals do, to be honest. But you know, the politics of who gets to be first author and all of that needs to be kind of debated, discussed, and agreed, because that can get very nasty sometimes. and it shifts as you're writing. Sometimes you can feel like you're doing 80% of the labor, and then it shifts and you're doing 10%. And so you kind of have to keep touching in with your co-writers about, you know, how is this labor being divided? And sometimes it's about who needs the publication most. So sometimes you might put an early career researcher towards the front of a list of authors if they need that publication for their career trajectory, or, you know, so there are all sorts of considerations that need to be taken into account around what you do in terms of collaborative writing and authorship. How do you pronounce his name? Joel?
Hi.
I've pronounced
yeah,
Hi.
it's Joel, but it's Jayne.
Sorry,
no, but it's complex. I just put some experience to feel this discussion from a Latin American country when my first language is Portuguese now. First, I think I really like your discussion. I think it's necessary, and it's amazing that this discussion comes from the place that we live. You know, but I feel, and sometimes that let me put some question. Who is outside of community of published in gender education journal? I think this is a good question for think about the process of publication, because I think and I feel that English language works as a political of exclusion. Mm-hmm. You know, this is so, because I feel here in Brazil, most of my colleagues pay attention and publish papers and books, and not paid so much attention in review the articles, you know, and it's a complexity space, because we are discussing this process of publishing, but we are inside this process, you know. I think I talked with Teresa and Angela. I never heard about some colleague that, oh, I spent 5 years of my life just reading and produce other things and publish it from 5 years, you know. And maybe we need to take care more to readers and who outside of the communities, then pay attention of the authors, you know. And I feel in my space-time metric from Brazil, the language, it's a huge, it's a strong politic of exclusion, you know, and then try to build some strategies that connecting people from different languages. Maybe it's a good way, you know, just to.
Yeah.
João wants to get Meeting the Universe Halfway translated into Portuguese.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it is a very real issue. And I think that the thing that we are trying to push at Gender in Education is, if Routledge, as we know, is part of the capitalist machinery and it's about the profit, then some of that profit should be invested in support, providing additional support for those scholars who have English as an additional language. That's an ongoing battle. And in the meantime, it's more of what Viv has been talking about, the free labour that we do amongst ourselves as a community to try to support scholars who are who have that additional challenge. It's just, yeah, it's constantly pushing and making unreasonable, as publishers would see it, unreasonable demands. But we keep doing that. Joanna.
Yeah, I want to support what João is saying about other languages also kind of appearing in these very mainstream spaces, because I think translation's not so much the issue, it's the presence of many languages in a journal. Some of us here know the journal Childhood and Philosophy, which is an open access journal and the number of languages, inability to read, for example, in Portuguese, and it positions me differently whenever I open a copy of that journal, as being a speaker of English, and I think that's kind of subtle but really important work to do through these media.
Sorry, no, I agree, Joanna. It's I think we see it in some journals, but again, I think that there is often a case put by publishers that it's too expensive to have a journal published in multiple languages. But of course, the vast majority of journals are now being published online, so that's not the same issue. So we have to keep these issues on the table and keep pushing back and saying, and I think you're absolutely right. I once sat through a symposium in Stockholm, and I hadn't realised that everybody would be speaking in Swedish. That was such an incredible eye-opener to me, to sit there through 4 papers in Swedish, not being fluent in Swedish, and to have this kind of real, very powerful experience of what it is to not understand or to be that linguistic other in the room. And it was really a very sort of important and powerful experience that we have a lot of work to do, but I think it's a really important point to keep on the agenda and to raise, so thank you. Viv?
Yeah, as well as language, I think it's about north-south politics, because in our National Research Foundation, we all rated as researchers in this country for getting grants and that sort of thing. So if you publish in African journals, they're not even counted as international journals. So it's what happens is that people are racing to have their work published in European and North American journals, and it sort of becomes a self-perpetuating cycle of who cites who and where people get published. So I think the funding policies of universities and of national ones sort of tend to dictate where publications are. Also, you mentioned book chapters. That I was told not to publish my thesis as a book because the university would get nothing from it. I must publish a number of articles and not even book chapters. And there was a time when South Africa's got nothing for book chapters. No credit whatsoever. It's changing a little bit now, and nothing for books. So it was all about publishing in particular journals.
Yeah.
And the universities earn money for each of those.
Yeah, and I think that I see that in other kind of international contexts where money is paid for publishing in certain places, and kudos attached to, and status attached to, and career success attached to where you publish. So it's really deeply problematic. But yeah, and I suppose one of the suggestions that was raised yesterday is, could we, as this collective, the Post-Qualitative Research Collective, think about our own journal? And when you're setting up a journal, you can maybe push back against some of these things, because you're not encased in the academic publishing machine in quite the same way. You will be beholden and shaped by them to some extent, but you can, with a kind of position of awareness, maybe find ways to, have these issues foundational to the way that the journal's set up, where it's set up, how it's presented, in what languages, in what medium, format, all of that kind of stuff. The other journal that I'm involved in, Reconceptualizing Educational Research Methodology, is based at Oslo Met University, so it's an in-house publication. It's completely open access, and we've pushed against, there is no word limit. People can present their work in multiple mediums, so poetry, images, film. You know, it's a real labour of love. It's so difficult to kind of achieve that, and we do publish in multiple languages. But you know, because it sits outside certain academic machinery, it's still contained and controlled by other academic machinery. The university owns it, so there are kind of issues there. But you know, it's this how do you, and that's why I think there needs to be a kind of plurality of types of outlets for our academic work. It shouldn't all be the Q1 journals. But I do recognise exactly what you're saying, Viv, about, you know, that the value that's attached and the pressure that we're under to publish certain sorts of things in certain sorts of places. But when we're in those sorts of places as authors, reviewers, editors, then we have a responsibility to try to push back against those and kind of bend the system somewhat in whatever small ways we can, or big ways, but, you know, lots of small ways, has a cumulative effect. So yeah. Okay, I think I'm gonna have to ditch quite a lot of what I was going to do, but that's fine. Now this is Sid. So he's my co-presenter, and he is he's a PhD student. He's in his final year. He's writing up. And he's been very keen to publish as he's been going along. And part of what we've done, as Teresa read out in his biography, is to write together. And that has been kind of pedagogical writing, so thinking about how you write posthumously, and string figuring as you write and theorising as you write. And so we've done that together. And he reached a point where he wanted to publish on his own. And we talked about it at length, and this is what he has to say about his experience of being a sole author as a PhD student in gender and education. And just to assure you, I had nothing to do with the processing of his paper at all. I worked with him prior to him submitting it, but then the other editors dealt with it, you know, in the interest of ethics and anonymity and so on. So he experienced the process as any other aspiring author would have done. So let me just play.
Having heard numerous horror stories of journal rejections and brutal peer reviews, I wasn't particularly looking forward to publishing my first sole-authored paper in a journal, let alone a high-impact journal. Publishing and writing with Jayne helped me be slightly acquainted with the workings of the academic publishing machine, and Jayne's advice to invest time and energy into research communities that I wish to be part of and in conversation with played a key role in where the paper would eventually find its home. Like her, I was very much attached to a feminist ethic of care and wanted to be in research communities that prioritize justice and care. And while I was trying to identify and locate scholarly work that had a key influence in my research journey, I realized that a major chunk of the research that shaped my feminist sensibilities was at the Gender and Education Journal, the eventual home of my first sole-authored paper. The journal state that each thing mattered, and whilst implicated with problematic aspects of the publishing machine, it's simultaneously undermined in small but important ways the profit-oriented neoliberal thrust of a brutal academic publishing machine. Thank you.
I now have the spinning wheel of doom. There we go. Okay, so I think that's a heartening narrative from Sid there, you know, that feeling prepared, knowing the politics that surround and underpin getting published, and having some tricks up your sleeve on how to navigate that, it can make it from a daunting, anxiety-inducing, traumatic experience to something that is more affirmative and more useful. You know, I think for Sid, I mean, what he didn't mention in that video was he had another journal paper that he's written alongside, which he submitted to other journals, that was just desk rejected, with very little feedback from the editor and very little feminist of ethic of care anywhere along the line, and he was really distraught by that experience. So the difference that can be made from supervisors, colleagues, peers, communities, we go into the process our eyes wide open and know that it can be brutal, and mitigating that as much as possible is the best that we can do, navigating ways through this academic machine. So there are, the brutal reality of rejection, as was being discussed yesterday by Roger in relation to grant applications. It seems to be a core feature of being an academic is dealing with rejection. It's and who wants to be rejected? You know, it's heartbreaking and it's soul destroying, and and we have to find ways to recognize that it's a reality, but there's also things we can do to try to limit the likelihood of our work being outright rejected. And these are some of the reasons, I've mentioned some of them already, as to why manuscripts are rejected. Because the aims and scope have been disregarded or not engaged with. You know, I've already laboured that point. That actually the piece may be better suited to a different journal or a different field of research, or that it's just been sent in on the hope that maybe the editors will see some promise in it. So I suppose the ethic of care goes two ways. As an author, you need to exercise an ethic of care to the editors and to the journal, and think, you know, have I carefully thought and considered that this paper will add something to that journal, that it is a gift to that journal, rather than seeing it in a more strategic and mechanistic way. So for us, if gender is peripheral, under-theorised, untheorised, naive or taken for granted, then it's a desk reject. It's a journal about gender, and that's the bottom line. I've already made this point about the connection to previous research, being part of that community, being in conversation with others. And the disconnection is about the coherence, and you can remedy some of this by having your peers or your supervisor, your colleagues, read the work. Is it coherent? Is there a cogent argument? Does the theory connect to the research questions? Is the methodology connected? Is there an overall coherence to what's being presented in the paper? And that doesn't mean it needs to be conventional. There's space. We publish quite a lot of post-humanist, feminist, new materialist work in gender and education, and it's presented in non-normative, unconventional format or arrangement structure. That's not the issue. We've pushed against the idea that you have to have abstract keywords, method, introduction, method, data, findings, whatever. No, we know that many of the papers in gender and education don't fit that, and neither should they, and we don't necessarily want them to. Other journals are much more formulaic and will reject your paper if it doesn't follow that strict structure. So check that out too. Know what the journal's expectations are. And for us, if the paper's not making some new or innovative contribution, and this, we know this from our PhD days, what's your new contribution to knowledge? It doesn't need to be huge, doesn't need to be earth-shattering, but you do need to be extending debates, disrupting, intervening. What is the new contribution that you are making to that field? And that field could be very niche within a bigger field, but what are you offering to the conversation? And I think this parochial nature of research, when it's very, very specific and very, very localized and doesn't make any effort to talk to international readership, then we have a problem with that. And this goes back to the point that Viv was making. Our authors need to think about that too. We need to think about it as editors, but so do our authors. Okay, so when, and I'm aware I'm probably running out of time now, aren't I? Did we? Yes, I have 4 minutes and about half an hour of presentation to go. So I'm going to have to either go very fast or ditch a load of stuff. Oh, really? Okay, so when and how do you decide where to publish? Thinking about the focus, does it fit? How often does the journal publish? You know, is there a lot of opportunity for you to find a space within that? Who reads it? This is about the community. Impact factor we've talked about, quartile ranking we've talked about, scholarly reach, whether it's open access, we've talked about that too. So those are factors that will influence which journal you choose. And then this is more about the alignment. So the aims and scope are the fundamental thing, but beyond that, you might align your article with a specific call for papers to a special issue. So it becomes even more specialist. So you have to ensure that your paper really does address what the special focus of that special issue. Talked about aims and scope. You can see aims and scope is appearing again and again. It's quite important. I've already talked about this. Are you referencing articles already published in the journal? Are you referencing topics that are already of interest and covered in the journal? Often there are themed issues or special issues, or it's something that is frequently dealt with in that journal. And the editorial focus. So everything I've shared with you today about, you know, where we're coming from as editors and what we've put in the aims and scope and the way that we run the journal. You know, all journals run slightly differently, and it depends upon who the editors are and who the editorial board are, and familiarising yourself with what is this community about, and what's the culture of this journal is really important. So making it really obvious that your paper is ideal for this journal or this special issue, making that very, very explicit. I'm going to skip these. It's writing retreats and collaboration. We've talked about that, one-off writing workshops. So you don't have to be in a room, well, maybe pandemic says you do, in a room on your own. I was going to say, but even then we Zoom, we have, and hopefully the world will open up and we'll have writing retreats and in sunny places and so on. I'm going to skip that. Okay, so you will want to know this, I think. How does your article get reviewed? What happens to it? So you've taken all this care to make sure that the paper is a good fit in others' work within a journal that's contributing and extending debates, it's making a new contribution to knowledge. What happens to it? You send it into the portal and then you get some automated email, and then what happens? And sometimes it can appear to take eons, months and months and months, and you're just wondering what on earth happened to that paper. You know, it's been your lifeblood and it's caused you sweat and tears for months and it's disappeared. Rest assured it's being dealt with, and in the case of gender and education, with a feminist ethic of care, we go to extraordinary lengths to try to ensure that your paper will go to the most suitable reviewers, those aligned with your orientation expert in their field, that will exercise the ethic of care that we do, and we hope that you do as authors. But that can take some time. You know, we work our way through. So there are several things we do. Firstly, we look at the reference list of your manuscript. Who are you engaging with? Whose ideas are you engaging with? And we'll identify possible reviewers from your reference list. We'll also trudge our own brain and think who would be really well placed to do this. We also have a database of over 1,000 reviewers, and that can match papers by keyword. That's why keywords are so important. And then we'll compile a long list of probably between 6 and 9 reviewers, and then we put those that we think are best suited at the very top. And then they're invited. Sometimes they're too busy to respond, and so they get a reminder, and that takes more weeks and more weeks and more weeks. And sometimes, if we're really lucky, they say yes, and then they're too busy to do the review, and then they have to be chased, and you get the picture. And if you're working your way through a list of 9 potential reviewers, and then reviewers drop out in the process, What we're endeavouring to do is to get your paper to the best reviewers and to have those reviewers sit with your paper through the entire process. So they provide you with detailed, helpful, affirmative, constructive feedback that then enables you to develop your work ready for publication. And then once you've done that work, it goes back to the same reviewers. Often that doesn't happen because the reviewers will refuse to review a second time because they're overburdened by the demands of academia and their own writing and so on. That's why it takes so long. It's incredibly complex, and we're working behind the scenes to navigate this and try to ensure that we keep the reviewers on board, that the reviewers are doing good quality reviews, that it's as helpful and useful. And we do intervene. We do take the position that we can gently edit or send a review back to a reviewer if it's not affirmative, if it's not constructive, if it's not useful, if it's just brutal and unkind and bullish, which I've had, and I'm sure many of the rest of us have in our lifetimes. That's not okay. You know, you can write a robust and constructive review that's helpful to an author. It doesn't have to be unkind. Okay, I don't think we have time to cover all of this. Does everybody need to dash off, or can I? I've already run over, haven't I? I have to wrap up. But what I can do is I can share this PowerPoint with you, and you can engage with it, these questions, and if you have comments, reflections, thoughts, whatever, then we can carry on that conversation in another space, another time, or email, or we can set up another Zoom, whatever. But as you can see, it's a very complex, messy, intricate. And when you care about it, it's exactly what has been discussed here today. It becomes even more complex and even more arduous and painful and all of those things. But it's worth it. It's worth it to have your work out there, and for others to engage with your ideas, and for you to make you and your work to make the contribution that it needs to those debates. There was an exercise at the end, but we've run out of time. But if people want to stay on and do the short exercise, I can do that, or I can just stop. Should we have, can I have thumbs up for stay on to do the short exercise? Or you just leave? I think everybody just leave? I think they voted with their feet.
No, there are people there.
Are there? Shall I? So it's possible. There's half an hour break?
No, we have half an hour before the next. No.
You mean I've got another half an hour? No, I don't. Okay, so I'm gonna. Okay. So what I want to do, and actually this doesn't take very long, so with your QR code there that will get you to the Padlet, was to think with and through some of what we've kind of covered in this session, and to participate in a brief sound experiment. There's no right, there's no wrong. You don't need to share what comes at the end of this if you'd rather not. That's absolutely fine. But equally, if you want to pop it up on Padlet, that would be great. So it's a free drawing experiment. I'll put the sounds on, and then you just grab your paper and your pen or pencil and listen to the sounds and free draw. Whatever comes onto your page comes onto your page. These are the sorts of questions that are quite helpful to keep in mind when doing this exercise. Is in what ways does the academic publishing machine work on and through bodies, blur boundaries, and set in motion effective forces that generate ways to think, feel, do otherwise? How might we engage in better, more affirmative and joyful modes of writing and publishing? And how might we collectively reimagine what a journal can be and what a journal can do? Okay, so these are some of the kind of metaphors or words that came to me when I started to think about the academic publishing machine and life in academia. Drowning, juggling, under your skin, you can't get it out of your mind, keeps you awake at night, completely at sea, spaced out, burnt out? Can you let it wash over you like water off a duck's back? Or are you running a tight ship? Is it all about strategy and metrics? Are you tuned in or zoned out? Okay, I'm going to play this. So if you've got your paper at the ready and your pen, and I'm not going to tell you what the sounds are either. I don't think you need to know, unless you're desperate to know what they are, and then I can tell you, but I'm not going to tell you at this point. Okay, here we go. Okay. Thank you so much for indulging me in the last few minutes, and for participating in that if you did, and if you feel happy to share a photo of your free drawing, then please do. I'm going to have to say farewell because we've got some internet issues here that Annika needs to resolve before our next presentation. But thank you all so much for joining and for participating, and I hope it's been of some use and that we can continue the conversation. Thank you so much. We'll be back in 1/4 of an hour, so that's 3 o'clock this South African time. Okay, see you later.